Today we are tackling part 2, and I want to kind of dig a little bit deeper as to why it is so important that we are intentional. I mean, it's pretty obvious in the sense that whatever we're not intentional about, we're going to be unintentional about, which means we're going to drift. We're going to live lives that are far more reactive than what they are proactive, and I wish I could sufficiently convey the heart of our Father God, who is so desirous. He is so committed to wanting to lead us very intentionally towards a life of purpose and meaning and fulfillment. I love what the author of Hebrews says in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to this life of faith, let us strip off every weight that slows us down. He's not talking literally, although it might include literal weight. But every weight, anything that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up. And let us run with endurance the race God has set before us. God has set a race before you. God has set a race before me. He has a plan. He actually has a purpose. It doesn't mean it's always going to be easy or always going to be exciting. In fact, I think some of the things that are the most fulfilling and the most meaningful often come at quite a cost. There's often resistance. There's often opposition. It often involves us persevering, digging deep, making sacrifices. The things that matter the most will often cost the most. And then verse 2, very important, he goes on to say, we do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus. Now, just pause there for a moment. The reason that that's so important is that what I just read in the previous verse is true of anyone, in the sense that if we get rid of distractions, we are more likely to pay attention to the things that we value. But what I'm encouraging you to do is to do more than value the things that you value. I want you to recognize that actually what God values is far better, far more important than what you value, and far more than just a self-help in terms of wisdom and practical steps. We're invited to a relationship with Jesus where, as we grow in that relationship, we have a clearer picture over time, one step at a time, as we keep doing the next right thing that we know to do, as we keep responding to the next prompt of God, as we keep trying to obey those parts of Scripture that we already understand, those truths that we already know to be true, as we try and obey and follow and grow in that relationship with Him, we will get to run the race with endurance that God has set before us. We do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus, the champion who initiates and perfects our faith. Because of the joy awaiting Him, He endured. So again, there was a cost. The thing that mattered the most to Jesus was you and I, it was people. And because of that, He was willing to pay the highest price, which was His death on the cross, disregarding its shame. Now, He is seated in the place of honor beside God's throne. And by the way, earlier in this book, it also talks about how He, now next to God, is actually praying for you, praying for me. He's interceding. Guys, there's just so much good news. Anyway, okay. So, we are invited to live a life intentionally. There is going to be opposition. There are going to be distractions. There are going to be things that are going to get in the way of you living the life that you want to live and that you think God wants you to live. Some of you, I'm not going to get you to put your hands up, but if you're honest with yourself or you're self-aware, you would say 2024 didn't quite go how I had hoped it would go, how I had planned it would go. Some of you are like, we're not even 3 weeks into January and it hasn't quite gone. 2025 isn't looking much better yet. Like it's just not working out the way that I hoped it would, or the way that I thought it would. And so even in those cases, we have a choice as to how we're going to respond. Are we going to respond to the surprises intentionally or unintentionally? Are we going to be drawn along with the current, or are we going to push back? Some of you might have heard of the Choluteca Bridge, which was built in Honduras in the late 90s by a Japanese firm. In fact, it was the largest bridge built by a Japanese firm in South America. Significant bridge. Honduras was regularly beaten and battered by hurricanes and storms, and just they were often impeded in terms of their infrastructure. So this company took, I think it was about 3 years, give or take, to construct an incredibly strong bridge. It had a lot of integrity, this bridge. It was opened up, I think it was mid-1998, but then a hurricane, Hurricane Mitch, descended upon Honduras. I think it was October of 1998, and decimated parts of the country. It actually damaged, and in some cases destroyed, other bridges and infrastructure. Now, because this bridge was built so strong, the bridge actually withstood the onslaught. But what didn't withstand the onslaught were the roads that led to the bridge and off the bridge. It was completely washed away. And the storms were so strong that you'll see in the next image that actually the river carved out a new path. This is a true story. And this bridge, which was initially christened as the Bridge of the Rising Sun, became known as the Bridge to Nowhere. And as I was thinking about that, I was prompted with the idea that some of you started out with a particular hope or dream. You might have even been given a name. You might have been called peace, and yet everything in your life has been anything but peace. You might have been called hope, and yet you feel like your life has been filled with despair. Maybe you were referred to as a gift to begin with, but actually you've been spoken so many negative words, destructive words of your life that have been telling you that you're a source of pain. Things don't always work out the way that we want it to, and we have to adjust to life that moves. The river moved. There are things in your life that has moved. Maybe a marriage didn't turn out the way that you thought it would. Maybe a relationship with someone where you thought there was this incredible trust, there was this great friendship. Maybe it moved. Maybe your career hasn't worked out the way you thought it would. Maybe your finances haven't worked out the way you were so diligent. You were so intentional. You tried, but it just didn't. Something happened. COVID happened. Life happened. People happened. A friend happened. And your financial situation, which you worked really hard to secure, is no longer there. Maybe you tried really hard to study, to apply yourself at school, and you've tried to be diligent, and it just hasn't worked out the way that you hoped it would. And what you thought would be a bridge of the rising sun is now kind of suddenly feeling like a bridge to nowhere. I want to encourage you to be intentional. And I say this with huge amounts of compassion because I know a lot of stories, but also a level of conviction because I know the hope that exists with God. The statement will be up on the screen. I am a victim of circumstance and a product of my response. We are not diminishing, invalidating, watering down very real circumstances. Every single person here, to some extent or another, would have a story. I can't tell you how often I walk away from a conversation with someone or hearing a story, or hearing about someone where the thought just keeps crossing my mind. Everybody's got a story. Everybody's got a story. Generally, you don't know what that story is, and so we tend to judge the outcome or the fruit, but sometimes you get to know the person a little bit more and you realize there's just so much brokenness, so much hurt, so much damage, so much. People have a story. And I'm so grateful that even though, and it's disappointing, so here's the reality, so that we're the victim of circumstances, that people don't have enough compassion and empathy and grace and patience. But the good news is that even though you might not get that from people, you have a very gracious, compassionate, patient, empathetic God who sees, who hears, who knows, who cares. We are victims of circumstances. And we are the products of our responses. We can't deny for the poor people of that region of Honduras that the river, it would be stupid to deny that the river moved. It's like idiocy. So I don't subscribe to the form of Christianity that denies reality, that denies that you're sick, that denies pain, that denies loss. No. I think Jesus would say, "Are you mad? Like that's real." Okay, what's next? How are we going to respond? What are we going to do? When we encourage you towards a 21-day distraction detox, which, by the way, there's nothing magical about 21, and you're not going to be loved by God more if you cut something out and loved less if you don't. Just to be clear, this is 100% invitational, and like you get to choose. Is there something that if I cut that out for a period, and you might want to do it longer, you might want to do it shorter, whatever, is there something that if I were to cut that out, I'm actually going to get a little bit of fresh air. There's going to be some blue sky. I'm going to have a quieter mind in my free time. By the way, just side note, please don't go to work tomorrow if you work on a computer and tell your boss you're not working for the next 21 days. This is not that, okay? And if you feel like work is a distraction, that ain't it either. Or school, or your parents, or chores. We'll unpack, what a distraction is in a moment. But the idea behind a 21-day distraction detox is simply so that we can pay attention to God's direction. That's the idea. We want to pay attention to God's direction. Going back to Hebrews 12, verse 1, strip off every weight that slows us down. So let's get rid of anything. Anything. It could be good, but it's a distraction right now. Anything that slows us down, and especially, so like obviously, like stuff that's actually tripping us up, sin that's actually tripping us up, and then let us run. Let's run with endurance the race that God has set before us. The reason why this is so important, and if you do want a title for today, the title is simply attention. It is so important because what we give our attention to matters. What we give our attention to forms us or deforms us. What we give our attention to forms us or deforms us. Romans 12 verse 2 says, do not conform. So don't be formed by the way the world thinks. Don't be formed by, just unconsciously, without even thinking, without even critiquing the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, which is, in this context, Paul's talking about allowing the truth of God's word, God's ways, to actually sharpen my mind, to narrow the focus, to help me clarify direction. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is. And without asking anyone to put their hand up, I'm guessing that deep down, many of us here, we would really like to know what God's will is. If we think about it, it's like, I wouldn't mind. Well, let's be transformed by the renewing of our minds. Pay attention to what you pay attention to. Will it be hard to get rid of a distraction? And by the way, you might have even noticed on the slide that it's just the word a. Just get rid of a distraction for 21 days. That was very intentional so that no one's feeling overwhelmed by get rid of every single distraction. I mean, maybe you want to. You're a type A personality, so you're like, I'm going hardcore. I am cutting out that's fine if that's what you want to do. But just for the rest of us, just something that is actually more of a distraction or a medication. You're actually medicating stress, you're medicating boredom, you're medicating grief, you're medicating feeling numb, whatever the case is, so that we can pay attention. And the reality is, it'll be hard. Some of you might be familiar with books like Dopamine Detox or Dopamine Nation. And it's interesting. Now, I can't endorse these books fully, but I'll just tell you that even just reading some of the summaries, and Dopamine Detox is a tiny little book, going through that, it's been so interesting for me to actually just understand in broader language how addicted we are to feeling something, how addicted we are to stimulation, how addicted we are to anything that just piques our attention. And in many cases, there's nothing wrong with it. Like there's a role for dopamine. There's a reason for it. But so many of us are walking around exhausted and depleted because we are so overstimulated. And again, just to be clear, I'm talking about your disposable time. This is not at school, not at work, not when you're doing stuff that you're committed to doing. I mean in your disposable time. Like some of us would even just be better after 21 days if we just got an extra hour's sleep. Or if we just sat quietly, just being or talking to someone or praying, thinking for half an hour before going to bed, instead of the last thing before going to sleep is And then because you can't hold it up, you're. Come on, how many people wake up with their phone still shining next to their face half an hour later? Hey? I've got like one honest friend in the world. I know you people. Not you, I just know people, right? It is. Okay. Let's try another question. Who would find it stressful to not be, like just at least like low grade stressful to not be able to take your device with you to the bathroom for the next 21 days? Okay, 7 more honest people. Guys, we're doing an altar call at the end of this service. We're going to be praying for deception and for lack of self-awareness. Okay, the idea is to be intentional. Be intentional about paying attention to God's direction. It matters. It's worth fighting for. It's worth paying a price for. Here's the difference between distraction and what I would call an interruption. This is something I've been wrestling over because just so you know, I never feel like my day goes according to plan. I never feel like my week goes according to plan. So you can imagine I never feel like my year goes according to plan. But the best way that I can try and describe the difference between a distraction, which is something that we don't want, versus an interruption, which is something we have to allow for. This is the best way I can describe. A distraction is anything that keeps me from what I truly value. You can't always control that. You can't always get away from that. But a distraction is anything that keeps me away from what I truly value. Whereas an interruption disturbs what I am focused on. So it does disturb the plan. It disturbs what I'm focused on. But it is still within my values. So when I hear of a situation where someone maybe needs something, it could be that in that moment it's actually an interruption because it's still within what I value. But when I'm just giving into the addiction of checking email every 3 minutes or checking messages or if you need to check other notifications, that's probably more of a distraction. Just to encourage those of you that are interrupted by appropriate things, I forget the exact stat, but I think more than half of Jesus' miracles were done in response to interruptions. So for those of you parents that are thinking, my children are a distraction, no, it's okay. They might be an interruption. I mean, hopefully they're an interruption, not a distraction. We might need to speak to social services if you consider your children to be a distraction. Hopefully they're within the line of what you value. So for example, appropriate rest is not a distraction. That's appropriate. Appropriate sleep, appropriate recreation. There's a place to recreate, to be refreshed and replenished. But chances are, given a 12-month period, thousands and thousands of hours of your disposable time spent scrolling or watching or gaming or whatever, that's probably more on the distraction side of things. Now, that might be low-hanging fruit. For me, I've got to be careful about other good stuff. So I have a desire for content to read, to understand. And what I do requires reading, listening, understanding, thinking, etc. And so I've got to constantly manage this tension between is this a healthy amount or is this actually an unhealthy amount? And I can't tell you how often I'll sense God prompting me saying, Jason, just go quiet. You don't have to fill every minute. The gravitational pull for me would be to be listening to something every free moment I have. So if I'm exercising, if I'm washing dishes, if I'm preparing breakfast, whatever, I will, and it's not, I'm not listening to sexualized rap. I could be listening to the Bible. I could be listening to a podcast. I could be listening to an audiobook. I could be listening to a book summary. So it's not this blatant thing, but there are times where it's actually a weight that's slowing me down because I'm overstimulating my brain. There is a sense of a dopamine hit that is being triggered every time I hear an interesting thought. So let's discern between distractions, interruptions, and whether or not it's helping us to focus on what matters most. Here is a really good question or set of questions to ask yourself as it relates to your disposable time, as it relates to what you're doing with your free time, with what you focus your attention on. Am I recuperating, recreating, medicating, or participating? Recuperating, hopefully, is pretty obvious. It's rest, which may or may not include sleep. Rest doesn't have to be replenishing. It's just I'm ceasing from, I'm stopping from engaging. I'm stopping from work, worry, and wanting. Whereas recreating or replenishing is where I'm actually now doing something that's actually topping me back up. So for me, to exercise, especially if it's outside, if it's in nature, that is replenishing for me. But if I'm not recuperating, if I don't get enough rest, I don't have the energy. I need energy and strength to do what replenishes me. Spending the right time with the right people takes energy. So if I'm not replenishing, I don't have the energy to do what's good for me. Reflecting on Scripture and praying, for me it takes energy. So if I'm not getting enough rest, that is harmed. Recuperating, recreating, medicating. I'm sure none of you struggle with it. But I've had to identify areas of my life where I'm medicating pain, stress. I can't say ever boredom, but maybe for you it's even boredom. But it could be disappointment. It could be whatever. Where I don't want to feel. Anytime I don't want to feel something, feel that thing right now, the idea then is to medicate. And for me, in its simplest form, it'd be sugar and cereals. Now, there's a place for that. It's not immoral. I mean, it can be, but I have to recognize: am I recuperating, recreating, or has this actually crossed over into medicating? There is nothing wrong with gaming in and of itself, with scrolling on social media in and of itself, with reading the news in and of itself, with reading books. There's nothing wrong with that stuff in and of itself. It's a question of, am I recuperating, recreating, or is this actually becoming about medicating? I'm actually medicating myself. And by the way, one of the ways to know that is how you get back into participating. As long as you're breathing, you should be participating. You should be contributing in some way in the world around you, the people around you. Let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up. And let us run with endurance the race that God has set before us. My invitation to you today, my encouragement to you today is to remove something, anything, and in a perfect world, everything that's slowing you down from what God has for you. What if a meaningful relationship, and by that I mean a friendship or a family relationship, whatever, what if that is around the corner from getting rid of something that's competing right now? What if there is a level of joy and peace that is a hard corner around, a challenging path around the corner from the way you're currently medicating what you're feeling? What if the sense of deja vu, I'm just living the same week in, week out, year in, year out, what if the only way for that to change is to actually change something? What if the only way for that to change is to actually get rid of something that is distracting? Another term for distraction would be competition. Like what's competing? What is competing for your attention and for what God has for you? Let's be intentional. Another question that I think is important to ask. I see that no one's taking notes, so that's wonderfully encouraging. I'm joking. I'm being sarcastic, which I shouldn't be, so I take it back. Am I? I'm joking. Some people are taking notes. Ask the question, because instinctively there are going to be reactions and responses. Not just today. I mean, when we face the next temptation, when we face that same habit that's been there for years, does this explain or excuse what I'm doing? It might explain it. So that relational breakdown, that financial loss, that pain, that that diagnosis, it might explain why you want to retreat. It might explain why you've been living isolated for a long time. It might explain why you are medicating your pain through any number of different ways. It might explain it, but does it excuse it? Now, there are times where it does excuse something. So if I lost a leg, I'm just trying to be really practical. If I lost a leg, that would excuse why I'm not probably going to train to run a marathon. But it would explain why it might be hard for me to maintain an exercise routine because now I've got to go back to the drawing board. So it might excuse why I'm not planning to run the Cape Town Marathon, but it doesn't excuse why I can't find an alternative. Again, I'm a victim of circumstance, but I am the product of my responses. Now, in case you haven't been around long enough to hear me deprecate myself and make you think less of me, I'm going to take an opportunity right now. The reason for that is because for any of us that preach, and it's a serious responsibility, we never want someone to think that we're saying stuff here that we think we've got all waxed. Like that was one of the burdens for Tammy last week. Would people think that we've got this all together? Because we don't have this all together. And Reese would be like, amen. We don't have, no, I'm joking, no. That's her husband. So, I have not been intentional enough with my health. Now, what is frustrating and what's interesting is that I have been quite intentional. There are a lot of things that I have tried to do well, but I just haven't done it well enough. So because there have been extraordinary distractions, interruptions, tensions, losses, griefs, pain, whatever you want to call it, I haven't corrected to the same proportion. So I would still eat a healthy breakfast, eat a healthy lunch, eat a healthy dinner, and then I snack. Where are my people at? Whoa! Now you feel ready to be honest. So between July of 2014 and July of 2024, so over that 10-year period, from our 15th anniversary to our 25th anniversary, I put on 40 kilograms. Thanks. I wanted to give Sue a lot more of me to love, okay? The reason I'm sharing this, number one, is that those of you that stick around long enough can see my sin, or you can see where I'm weak, so that doesn't help much. But it's to tell you that I'm fully acknowledging that it's hard. I was still exercising a fair amount, just not enough. Part of that is because I was inflamed. I would feel the after effects of exercising every time I exercised. I would want to get more sleep, but I'd be so tired but wired at the end of the day. Anybody? You get home from a long day, a hectic day, and you're tired, but like the last thing you want to do is sleep. You just want to escape. So I would escape. I can escape like nobody's business. People that say they can't just sit around and watch stuff, I'm like, I don't mind being sick. As long as I don't feel too bad, I can watch stuff, I can escape, no problem. Are you picking up that there's a bit of a compulsive side to me? Okay. Now, by the way, side note, that is true, but that's not an excuse. Yeah. There is a compulsive side to me. My family for generations has battled with compulsivity, otherwise known as addictions. So it's true, but it's not out of my control. And so I can't even easily tell you what the one thing was that made the biggest difference, because I've tried lots of things. I've been to dietitians. I've been for exercise plans. I'm busy finishing an exercise plan right now that I got in 2019 that was supposed to last for 6 weeks. It's taken me 5 years to get this 6-week exercise program right, okay? And in case you're wondering, I'm not joking. It was a 6-week exercise program given to me in 2019. The lady kept messaging me during COVID saying, like, let me know if you want to adjust. I'm like, I haven't done anything yet. I don't want to adjust anything. Now, part of what I'm trying to get across, and I mean this cautiously, is I can't tell you that there was one silver bullet. I can't tell you that there was one prayer. I've prayed many prayers, sincerely. I've been aware for a long time that I am potentially shaving years off of my destiny. I've been aware that because of my position, there is a level of responsibility and example. Absolutely. None of those things have made enough of a difference. Sue came across someone several months ago that we went to chat to as a family and helped us just, again, put stuff into place that you kind of know to be true. I can't tell you why this time it's worked and why other times it hasn't. But as a family so far, we've lost a Tammy. Okay? That's the best way I can put it. As a family so far, we've lost a Tammy. So I've lost 20 kilograms since the 1st of August last year. Now, I say that because I'm trying to encourage myself, and I'm trying to encourage you that I'm not where I was. I'm not where I want to be, but I'm not where I was. I'm not where I want to be, but I'm not where I was. Now, in case you're wondering, this is not. I mean, I'm sure there's a bit of ego involved. Absolutely. I mean, I prefer to look better than worse. Okay. However, I think I can say before God that the biggest burden for me is being able to love Him more and love people more. And so I know that some of the things that I haven't been getting right have stopped me from the extent to which I want to be able to love God and love people more. To which I can serve the purposes that I believe God has for me. I can be a better husband the healthier I am, a better father the healthier I am, the better friend the healthier I am, the better leader, the better everything. I can cope with stress better. I gave up long ago hoping that God would give us like an easy year. Like, if we could tell you stories. So I honestly can't tell you when last, if I've even prayed, God, let it be an easy year. I want to be stronger. I want to be healthier. I want to have more capacity for whatever life is going to throw. And so I can tell you that there are circumstances, which I won't go into, but I'll tell you that I also think we have choices. Now, it's not one size fits all. I can't tell. And by the way, the cutting out of sugar, gluten, dairy, that's one part of it. I've had to make choices about the time I go to sleep, what time I'm getting up in the morning, how I'm going to exercise. Let me give you some final examples. Some of the things that I do struggle with, right? So there's reality, and then there's response. Reality, I struggle with concentration for a bunch of different reasons. Those of you whose names I've gotten wrong repeatedly, you can attest to the fact that I struggle with concentration and with remembering stuff. I can lean genetically, like in terms of my wiring, there's a part of me that can lean towards melancholy, which if not checked, so many years ago, I had to be very careful what I watched and what I read. It can lead if unchecked. By God's grace, I don't think I've ever gotten into that space, but it can lead towards depression. By nature, I have been wired to think and feel deeply. I feel way more deeply than what I want to. People, you may not realize it because I try and hide it and fake it so that you don't expect more. But I've got to go and deal with it. But I can feel too much about too many things. So I can carry instead of just caring. These are realities. However, I believe that through God's invitation to get rid of distractions, to get rid of stuff that's competing for my attention, I can address my lack of concentration through guardrails with media and technology. How I start my morning, whether or not the first thing I do in my morning is pick my phone up and go through stuff, or if I allow my mind to actually stay a little bit calmer where I can think more deeply. Something else, and this was one of the tipping points for me when we sat down with this lady, it's the first, please forgive me, those of you that know this to be true, but it's the first time I ever heard anyone saying to me that cholesterol medication, which I've been on for a couple of years, which is my own fault, and again, there's a predisposition, so just naturally my cholesterol was high, even in my early 20s. It's the first time I've heard that what cholesterol does for your heart, so the good part it does, so it's stopping your arteries from clogging up, it's also draining your brain from the oils that it needs to think properly, to function, to concentrate. And I was feeling like it's getting worse. So I'm like, whoa, hold the phone. So again, there is a natural predisposition, but changing how I eat, not eating fat, not eating sugar, taking the skin off of a chicken breast, which is the best part, right? I've been able to halve the medication, and hopefully in the next couple of weeks or month or so, we'll come off it all together. So again, I'm saying there is a natural, there's a circumstantial reality, but there's what can I do? How can I address that? So if I'm going to not give in to my lowest desires, it means I need to get a little bit more sleep. So I can't be binge watching at night. In terms of melancholy, as I said, I've got to be careful that I don't consume and meditate on all kinds of news events that I can't do anything about. You see, and this is what's deceptive for those of you that can relate to this. Outrage can feel like a meaningful emotion. And there's a dopamine hit, I think, attached to it. But when we're exhausted from feeling so much about things that we can't do anything about, we don't have the energy to do something about what we can do something about needs that are around us, in our community, in our relationships, at work, at school, where we are. So I've got to be careful there. In terms of thinking and feeling deeply, I have to slow down in my time with God. I have to slow down to get perspective. I need perspective. The older I get, the more desperate I am for God's perspective. It's so far past like the blatantly right and the blatantly wrong. It's God, what do you want? And having that security and identity in Him, strengthened and reassured constantly. I came across an idea of a prayer recently that I mentioned to our guys at team night this past week, that I've set as a reminder on my phone to go off every day, just praying, Lord, what will make you happy today? What will make you happy today? It's been a strangely clarifying question. I'm praying it regularly throughout the day. God, what will make you happy today? So instead of feeling too deeply about everything and overthinking, God, what would please you today? What would please you today? I am going to wrap up very soon, but allow me to just resolve my obsessive compulsive disorder by finishing my notes. A couple of final questions before I want to leave you with another question. If you were your enemy, if you were your spiritual enemy, what would you want to distract you from? Because I do believe that you have a spiritual enemy. And I think in many cases, they are far more convinced of your potential than what you are. So what might they be wanting to distract you from? And then secondly, if you were your enemy, how would you look to distract you? It might not be obvious, hectic stuff. It might be subtle, long-term stuff. Say no to what you want now for what you want most. That's going to be a challenge. If you're going to do a distraction detox, it shouldn't be because the church says so. No, it's like, am I wanting to say no to something that I want now because of what I want most? And then persevere. Persevere. Dopamine is quick, serotonin is slow. Pleasure is quick, joy, meaning, and fulfillment is slow. Anna Lemke, who writes Dopamine Nation, again, I can't endorse the whole book, but I do agree with this statement. In a world where a dopamine surge is a click, a swipe, or a bite away, patience is the antidote. Patience. Often, when you're trying to implement new habits, it gets worse before it gets better. We call it the J curve. Feels like we're getting worse before we're getting better. So be patient, persevere. Here's the last passage that I want to leave with you. This is Jesus, about whom this following account is recorded, where he went to a place where people that were lame, injured, handicapped for different reasons would lie around a pool that superstition declared occasionally an angel would come and stick his finger in the pool and stir it, and if someone could get into that pool, that they might be healed. And so he comes across a man who's been lying there for 38 years, so nearly 4 decades. Nearly 4 decades he's been lying there, waiting, hoping. And it says in John 5, verse 6, when Jesus saw him and knew he had been ill for a long time, he asked him, "Would you like to get well?" His answer was, "I can't, sir. For I have no one to put me into the pool when the water bubbles up. Someone else always gets there ahead of me." Jesus didn't ask, "Can you help yourself?" He asked, "Do you want to get well?" And again, I can't tell you how heavily impressed upon me it was when I was just reading through this again, thinking about this again, thinking that I think that there's very likely someone that's here today or watching this online, where if you think about it honestly, it's been 38 years or possibly longer. You might not have this physical limitation, this physical handicap, like it might not be obvious to other people. But I'm wondering if God, in His kindness and in His gentle way, might be asking you, do you want to get well? And everything in you might want to respond with everything that you can't do, everything that you've tried. You want to unpack a resume. And I just feel that for some people, He would say, no. Would you like to get well? Would you actually like healing in that area that still brings you pain? Do you want to allow that wound to turn into a scar? Do you want to get well? What's interesting in the story is that, it's like so quick it's like a couple of verses in the Bible. Jesus just tells him, pick up your mat and walk. He's like, okay, boom. And the man's healed. He's up. You know what the first thing is he does? He goes straight to the temple. He goes to the place that he was rejected from for nearly 4 decades. He was not allowed in those days to go to the temple with a physical handicap. So this is pre-crucifixion, resurrection. This is pre the Holy Spirit being made available to every single person. He was disconnected from God for 40 years. The first thing he does is go and run to God. How sad would it be if his legs had been healed and he had just carried on his way and had not actually found the greatest, deepest healing, which is the healing of our souls, the healing of being known and loved and forgiven and wanted. I can't promise you that every single pain will be healed today. I can promise you, though, the one thing I can promise you is that God's love is available to every single person. That healing love is available to every single person. And so as you close your eyes, before I pray for us, I just want to ask you the question. Is there an area where you want to be well?